Now we're ready to get into the meat of the day. We have three very knowledgeable speakers. So I think if I had to put a theme around this, it's around the idea of infrastructure, whether it be physical infrastructure or legal infrastructure, even social infrastructure. That's kind of the theme that I saw in the three presentations that you're about to see. We'll finish up the first part of the morning with Manley Begay, who's a professor of applied indigenous studies here at NAU.
Morning. That's Washington. I'm very happy to be here. My name is Manley Begay, and don't actually my dish is the not great actually to look at the dash chedo to cheat dash no, I got that wrong. My dish usually is touchy, it was cheat, look at the dash chedo to the cheat dash. Ado kenshna ya kiani la ado ibetode yaschin ado kasada ida bechido klashida another ado hardship no do another kid on talking. Very happy to be here, and for those of you that don't understand Navajo, we're speaking about you. Behind your back. No, I'm just kidding. Especially the white faces. No, I'm just kidding. I don't have much time, so I'm going to apologize right away that I'm going to go into your break, and I hope it's okay, because I have a 2-hour presentation to give. But this conference is a tribal economic outlook conference, so I kind of focused on that. You know, we're just in the midst of recovering from this crisis, economic crisis that just occurred beginning in 2008, and this is what we saw. I was reading the news this morning, and then oil and gas is sort of on the rebound, and but it's going to be a while before that rebounds, and the housing bubble bursts, and it's sort of hitting. It hit all over the world. It affected Greece. It affected Spain. It affected Puerto Rico. It affected Brazil, and so forth and so on. So we're sort of in the midst of this economic crisis and in the midst of recovery, but. Pre-2008 conditions, most likely it's not going to happen again. Probably not for many, many years. So this is sort of the context that we're facing and thinking about economic outlook. And especially in Indian country, it was the worst economic situation since the 1930s. Huge. It was huge. You know, you look at the gas prices. You know, we're almost the 1970s gas prices. Unbelievable, you know. So I think if you're going to look at the economic outlook, you need to look backwards, and then you need to look at now, then you need to look at the future. So let's take a quick look backwards. So obviously, for those of us in the Southwest, you know, we have a whole history with the Spanish colonial period. And also the Mexican colonial period, but this is sort of the American colonial period. You can see here the blue that I put here. These are the only times in Indian country that we enjoyed the full extent of sovereignty, and I say full loosely, because who knows what some of the Supreme Court decisions are going to come up with coming up. Especially the Mississippi case and other cases as well. But you can see here international treaties in the 1990s, things began to change. The 1990s, we began to recover. Everything else in red, the federal government of the United States controlled this. Only now are we beginning to enjoy a sense of sovereignty. So we're talking about a very short period of time in this recovery period. So we're moving from this self-determination, from the 1970s Indian Self-Determination Education Act, and sort of the remnants of that, and now we're into this sort of recovery period, and I call it nation rebuilding. So as a result, Indian country enjoys, tribal governments enjoy a tremendous amount of tribal powers. The only thing that we don't enjoy is our own postal service issuing our own currency and also having our own military. We used to have our own military, but we have all of this lawmaking power and jurisdiction over our territory, and we're very strong. Levi just talked about sort of the political sovereignty status of Indian country is tremendous. And a lot of it has to do with just sort of this Nike attitude that we need to take, as Levi was talking about, is just do it. You know, if you want to go do something, just do it. And now's the time to do it. Because what if a Republican president was elected? The Senate is controlled by Republicans, you know, the House is as well, and we have Republican president. We're in big trouble. So I'd say just do it now, before something else happens. Back in the 1990s, a group of us began to study, Joe Holt, Steve Cornell, and I began to study what was happening in Indian country. There was a group of Indian tribes that were just pulling ahead from the rest. And we wanted to know, why are they kicking butt politically, economically? You know, why are they becoming political and economic powerhouses? And we found out that these are some 5 key ingredients to economic success. Joe and Steve came up with 1, 2, and 3, and I came up with number 5 because my dissertation was on leadership education of Indian nations, especially in particular the CEOs or the chief executives. And sovereignty is absolutely critical. It's the first and foremost ingredient to economic success. 2, you've got to get your capable, you have to set up capable governing institutions. You have to have separation of business from politics, you have to have good court systems, you have to have good rules, policy, good constitutions. So that's why today a lot of tribes are now rebuilding or rethinking their constitutions. If you have a 1934 Indian Reorganization Act Constitution, change it. So it reflects the current conditions today. 3, you have to make sure that these institutions are culturally appropriate to today. They have to be culturally appropriate. You have to think long term. Number 4, you've got to plan for 100 years down the road if you want to be successful. You can't just think about now. 5, you have to have really good leadership. Leaders have to step up and make some tough choices. You cannot sort of perpetuate what's been happening all along. So in short, the nation building challenge is really a governance challenge. And if you have your governance act together, economic development will follow. So governance is absolutely key. It's how you organize, how you put yourself together, how everything works together. If things aren't working, most likely it's a governance issue. If employment is not rising, it's a governance issue. Why? Because it's only now that we're building our own governing institutions. This is the problem from Greece to Brazil to Puerto Rico to Detroit. You know, these are places where basically they're filing bankruptcy. Their economies are all trash, you know? So let's take a look. If you want to know where we're headed and where we want to, what the outlook looks like, we need to know where we're at. So let's look at a good place to look is health statistics. One of the most significant places to look is your infant mortality rate. This is the most comprehensive, single most comprehensive indicator of the level of health in society. If you don't know what your infant mortality rate is, you don't know where you're at, economically, socially, governance-wise. It measures the well-being of infants, children, and their families. So what is it? It's basically how many of our babies are dying before they reach 1 year old. That's the way you determine how healthy your society is. So here is the United States, and I put a big arrow for those of you that can't see, like me. In the United States, the infant mortality rate is 9.22 for American Indians. We were second after African Americans. That's huge. Here's a report card, for an international report card. Look at where the US is at. 1960s to 2000. The report card for the US is D. Horrible. The infant mortality rate in the US is absolutely horrible. Here are the best places. Netherlands, Norway, Sweden, Switzerland. This is Northern European countries. Their infant mortality rate is around 1, 2, or 3. Why? Because they have their economic act together. They have their governance structure together so they can provide really good health care. Today, Northern European countries are bailing out the Southern European countries after 2008. Why? Because they have their act together. Here is the 5 top reasons for infants dying for American Indians. Preterm related causes, congenital malformations, SIDS, and unintentional injuries. I mean, unintentional injuries are basically what we call accidents. You know, so it really is sort of, most of these are all preventable. Here is the United States. Here's Arizona's infant mortality rate. It's 5.9, almost close to the US's. And the margin that the Healthy People's Initiative, they want to get it to about 4, if at all possible. So things aren't as healthy as we think they are. You know, the world's richest, most powerful nation has some real serious health issues. Here is Arizona. You can see the mark here. I put another big arrow here. For American Indians, the infant mortality rate is about 9, probably a little bit over 9. That's huge. That's a huge indicator that things aren't as well as we think they are. And here's the infant mortality rates for the 5 leading causes by race in Arizona. So I put another big arrow here. You can see the big blue mark. This is all American Indians in Arizona. And the number 1 reason is congenital malformations, deformations, and chromosomal abnormalities. And some of this is preventable. It's also related to alcohol abuse. It's related to healthy conditions. It's related to good foods. And so here in Arizona, we have some, as Indian people, we have some big issues to overcome. Here are the leading causes of death in American Indians in the US and in Arizona. Here are the 5 leading causes of death. Number 1, cancer. In the last year, I have had several family members actually that have passed on because of cancer. And it's a huge issue. Especially here in northern Arizona, you know, we hear about being in downwinders. We hear about, you know, the nuclear experiments that occurred in Nevada, and the jet stream goes west to east, and we're right smack in the middle. Heart disease, unintentional injuries, diabetes, chronic liver disease, and cirrhosis. 2, 3, 4, 5 are preventable. Here's Arizona. Female, both, and male. And I'll just go down to both portion of it. Heart disease, number 1. 2, cancer, unintentional injuries. Interesting. Some of this relates to just not using seatbelts. You know, just putting the seatbelt on, and then also when car accidents occur, if you don't have your seatbelt on, it's highly likely you're going to get seriously injured. Diabetes, then chronic liver disease, and cirrhosis. For the female, you have influenza and pneumonia being one of the top 5. Here, very similar to the both section for men. Navajo Country is really interesting. Often when I talk about economic development and the challenges that we face, the biggest response is, well, Navajo, we're different because we're big. We have a lot of people, so we don't fall into the same category as other Indian tribes or other nations. So I said, okay, let's take a look at this. Is it really true? Here's Navajo in the left column. The closest comparison to Navajo is Iceland. Iceland has a almost similar square miles of land, similar population, 318,000, whereas Navajo is over 332,000 and counting. But look at the infant mortality rate. Navajo is about 7. Look at Iceland at 1.8. Look at Scotland. Scotland, it has almost a similar square miles of land as Navajo, 4.1. Netherlands, 3.66. Smaller piece of property than Navajo. You look at Cuba. A lot of Navajo leaders went to Cuba just last month. And Cuba actually fares better than us, 4.76 in terms of infant mortality rate. And look at the unemployment rate down at the bottom. Look at the life expectancy rate. You know, the life expectancy rate for Navajos is 72.3 years. And look at Cuba, 79. If you move to Cuba, you'll live longer. And look at the unemployment rate. So let's take a look at employment rates, not necessarily unemployment rates. Why? Because the unemployment rate is not the best measure for populations suffering from chronically high unemployment. It's a wrong measure really to look at. Because once someone stops looking for work, she is no longer counted as unemployed. She is defined as not being in the labor force. So to be unemployed, one has to be actively looking for work. And this is just the way it's measured. So let's not look at unemployment, let's look at employment rates. So here is the difference between unemployment and employment rates. If the number of jobs that are needed in the United States, if we take the unemployment rate and say, okay, we need 90,000 jobs, but you take a look at the employment rate, which is much more accurate, we need over 200,000 jobs to get up to par with the rest of the United States. It's a huge difference here of over 140,000 jobs. So I think we're looking at the wrong measure for what's happening in Indian country. This is just a sort of another way to look at it, on-res and off-res in terms of employment rates. Very similar. Off-res and on-res. Not much difference. Now let's take a look at all the states in the United States that have Indian reservations. There are about 35 or so. Look at the top 5. These are the best places. If you're Indian, these are the best states to work in. You'll most likely find a job. Nebraska, Connecticut, Texas, Oklahoma, Mississippi. Don't live in the bottom 4. Michigan, Utah, and Arizona. South Dakota, horrible. And look at the difference between American Indian and white rates here. So there's something wrong here. If we're talking about tribal economic outlook in Arizona, there's something wrong here. There's something going on here that prevents American Indians from having good jobs, or even a job at all. You look here at Flagstaff. I moved from Tucson about 1.5 years ago. In Tucson, you go to Walmart, there's a Latino working at the counter. You go into a restaurant, Latino working here. You go into a restaurant here in Flagstaff, it's an Indian person working there. took my truck to go get fixed because I had a little dent in it. It was a Navajo adjuster talking to me in Navajo. I went in the back, all Navajo workers. The economy of Flagstaff runs on Indian money, Indian work. That's how Flagstaff operates. How many of you had a ticket for speeding, especially if you're driving on 89? You know, the money that you pay goes into the coffers here, Flagstaff. So drive slow over there. Don't give them your money. Keep it in your pocket. So even, this is really interesting, even when Native Americans are similar to whites in terms of factors such as age, sex, education level, marital status, and state of residence, their odds of being employed are 31% less than those of whites. I have a doctorate degree from Harvard University. I'm really lucky to have a job in Arizona. Because, just because you're Indian, that means you have a 31% less chance of getting a job. So what does that mean? What does that mean? Why, you know? You Indian people out there, you know why. You know, just because of the color of your skin, there's a bit of racism, discrimination going on here. I think, you know. Now, let's take a look at some demographics. This is sort of the data and information of the 31% less that I was telling you about. So, the best states to live in, if you're an Indian, to get a job is Wyoming, Mississippi, Nebraska. California, South Dakota, Arizona, Utah, Levi, Fort Mojave Indian tribe is right there at the border. Chippewa is right by there as well. And a lot of our brothers and sisters sort of around the California border. Huge, huge, huge issue here as well. Now, take a look at this. This is another way of looking at things as also in terms of employment. Arizona, down at the bottom, once again. All the ones in red are horrible places to live if you're Indian and you want a job. So move to Oklahoma, Oregon, or Mississippi. This is really interesting. Okay, what sort of helps, for those of you that are students here at NAU, stay in school, graduate, but don't settle for a bachelor's degree, go get a master's degree, get a doctorate degree. Why? If you have an advanced degree, a master's degree or a doctorate, you have a 607% chance of getting a job. So education really, really matters. Absolutely important. Stay in school. So the factor that does the most to increase American Indians' odds of employment is higher education. You're 7 times more likely to have a job if you have a college degree. Let's look at income statistics. This is the year 2000. There are a group of tribes here that are sort of crossed the threshold. Rincon, Pala, Morongo, you know, they're the ones that are sort of moving ahead really well. These are some of the gaming tribes. Look at the per capita income in Arizona. The median household income is $31,601, whereas the rest of the state of Arizona is $51,000. Per capita income, $12,829. The rest of Arizona, much higher. We have a long ways to go. You think, okay, just because you're a gaming tribe, you're doing really well? Let's take a look at Salt River. Look at their household income, $31,892. The county and the state, much higher. Now look at Gila River. Same thing, about 29,000. Look at the rest of the county and also the state. So just because you're a gaming tribe doesn't mean that your median household income is going to be substantial on par with the rest of the county or the state of Arizona. Here's another look at per capita income around Gila River. Look at 9,000, about 10,000 to the state of Arizona and the Pinal County. Much higher, almost twice as much. So where are we going with all of this? you can expect the following. The major Indian-related program spending is going down, and it's going to probably go down even more. So you can't really rely on the feds, to bail you out on a lot of stuff. Look at the federal non-defense spending, that's going up. So there are two contradictory measures here. And what's really interesting, although, is over the course of years and decades, real per capita income earned by those of us living on res grew by 33.3% in the 90s and 11.5% in 2000, compared with the national average, which is much less. So here's a ray of sunshine in terms of the outlook. Look at the bottom one on gaming. Reservations with gaming experience increase in employment of about 26%. That's huge. If you can increase your employment by 5%, you're doing absolutely wonderful. Look at gaming. Gaming brings in about almost $30 billion. And the only other that's closest is sort of the commercial piece of it. It says something about gaming. But gaming is not about gaming necessarily. Gaming is about political sovereignty, the right to conduct business the way we want it. Look at this, another 1970s to 2000. Look at the per capita income has been gaining. Things are getting a bit better. Here's just another way to look at it. If incomes in the U.S. and in these Indian areas grow steadily, at the rates they experienced from 1990 to 2010, in about 2054, the per capita incomes would converge. So years, we have to plan for that eventuality. You cannot plan for, 3 years or 5 years. You have to plan for 2060. If you really want to get out of some economic hardship. Here's just another way of looking at it. The steady increase in terms of per capita income. So things are getting better. There are tribes that are moving ahead really well. Chickasaw Nation, Paiute Indian Nation, Tlingit and Haidas are doing absolutely wonderful. Really making some fantastic investments and moving forward really, really well. Here's two tribes I want to quickly mention. This is in Canada and also the US. Remember too, the first Aboriginal Indian nation in North America that's ISO certified. As a result, they bring in over 7 times the money that the federal government of Canada gives them. They have a high school graduation rate of 100%. Unreal. Southern Ute tribe, AAA plus credit rating. Higher credit rating than the country of the United States and state of California. They have over $24 billion in the bank. Their credit rating is unreal. So what kind of society we want to build? So what is this all about? Here's what I think. We need all of this here: political sovereignty, environment, governance, economic growth, education, health, and language, to be able to get to our goal. But what's our goal? So these are just the means of getting to our goal. And I think here are some measures to think about. This is just my perception. Yours might be different. You need to have political sovereignty to be able to get economically well. You need economic growth. You need money to get stuff done. You need to have also language and culture, because that's how you build capable governing institutions that are culturally appropriate for you. All the other stuff helps. But what's the goal? Why are we talking about economic development? This is what I think. I don't think it's about making money necessarily, getting the most amount of money. I think it's about language and culture. That should be #1 goal. That's why we're in the business of economic development. And also to protect the environment, our land, our plants and our animals, the water, our air, and so forth. That's the reason why we're talking about economic development. So, here's homework for all of us, those that are non-Indians and Indians as well. We need to think about a new way of governing. We need to practice good governance, separating business from politics. The politicians cannot be in control of business decisions. It's too easy to put your hands in a cookie jar and put it in your pocket. You got to prevent that, separating business from politics. You have to have a good court system to make sure that if somebody does it, they can get their hand slapped, or worse. Think about long-term financial investment sustainability. We got to think 50 years, 100 years down the road. Non-Indians and Indians, you have to support political sovereignty, because that's the only thing that has worked in Indian country in the history of the United States. That's what's bringing and pushing economic development, not anything else. Increase the number of and strengthen Native American community development, financial development institutions. Invest in education, invest in education, invest in education, especially early childhood education. Absolutely critical. The state of Arizona doesn't believe, as far as I'm concerned, the state legislature is less interested in investing in education. So you have to do it. Invest in culture and language, absolutely critical. Improve maternal and child health. Get your statistics act together. Confront racism. Create long-term partnerships with universities and colleges. Now is the time to invest in universities. Endow programs. Endow faculty chairs at ASU, U of A, NAU, and other places. I prefer NAU. Put your money there. Invest it. Because why? If you invest it, you'll own a piece of NAU, a piece of ASU, a piece of U of A. And that's going to be forever. So you've got to invest in long-term partnerships with universities. This is what I believe in the long run that will build a healthy Native society, not only in Arizona, but in the rest of the country. Thank you.